record to the cloud.
Okay.
We are now recording live on Changing Times, Changing Worlds.
Hold on. So I'm chatting with Coyote Sky Woman, and she's saying she's having trouble getting back in.
Shall we try inviting her again?
Yeah, let me see.
Okay. Well, I'm making dead air, and that's not good. I'm going to, Mary Alice, are you trying to get Coyote Sky Woman back on?
Yeah.
Okay, then I will just introduce this show. This is a show that is based on, it's being done by me, Chipicon. I haven't got a good name for it yet. We may change the name 1 or 2 episodes in. Right now I'm calling it Changing Times, Changing Worlds Wednesday show. Mary Alice likes to call it Chipicon show. You may throw something into the chat if you have a better suggestion or like either of those. The whole idea is that I'm trying to get used to, and I guess everybody on Changing Times, Changing Worlds Planning Committee is trying to get used to the virtual communication that is required by the pandemic. So we are going to be having a virtual con in November actually it's kind of cool because this year it's going to be an entire week. We will have the usual full weekend, and yet Monday through Friday we're going to have 2 or 3 presentations every evening. The date will be November 9th through the 15th in 2020, and we're kind of looking forward to it. And okay, Coyote Sky Woman says that the password is not working. There should be. Let's see if that works. So this should be a kind of exciting, a kind of exciting thing for this fall. But meanwhile, we have to get used to doing things virtually. I have been to virtual classes before. I have never done one before, which is why I'm babbling tonight. I expect to be a little bit cooler in a couple of days. But, well, and I say a couple of days, I mean, we're going to be doing one a week, every Wednesday night, 8 to 9. And we're going to be talking to the various speakers that have been at Changing Times, Changing Worlds before, and we hope will be at Changing Times, Changing Worlds this year. And we're going to have them and we're going to basically give a little taste of what Changing Times, Changing Worlds is about. It is based on an idea that Jane Sibley and I had 10 years ago, that if people would just stop pretending that the occult, paranormal, supernatural didn't work and accepted the fact that it does work, and we instead put our energy into sharing how it works, not what's the mechanism, but how do I make it work in my life and make my life better, that maybe in a generation it won't be so silly with everybody pretending that it doesn't work, and we can actually get on with our lives and use these tools which come naturally to people. So we started a conference, and we've been doing it for 10 years in the middle of November every year. And this is going to be just a taste of that. We're going to be putting it up on YouTube, doing it live on Wednesdays, and then putting it on YouTube, and so people can see what we do. Now, some of the things that we have often done can't be done as well. It's hard to do a ritual. We've done healing rituals. It is hard to do the crafts classes, such as Elena has often done, which you can make magic with an embroidery. You can make magic with a lot of normal things in our lives. And that's very cool. I'm asking one of my dowsing friends from the American Society for Dowsers if she can come on. She was Carol Gator at one of our earlier Changing Times, Changing Worlds. And still waiting to get, wait a minute, here she is. She's back. Our guest speaker for the evening, Coyote Sky Woman. And Coyote Sky Woman is like me from New Hampshire, and is is in the pagan community. And she last weekend did a ritual. Was that a healing ritual?
It was kind of a little bit of everything.
And I said, "Oh, that's cool. I need somebody for the show on Wednesday. Can you come on, and what can we talk about?" And so Sacred Kings and Sovereignty sounded fun to me. And that isn't necessarily something everybody's excited about, but it sounds like fun to me. And so, I didn't get very specific about in the modern world. Is it okay if I say you're a teacher?
Yeah, definitely a teacher.
Are you a history teacher, or is it just that you know a lot about history?
I tend to do a lot of research.
That sounds familiar. So, I understand that. So, well, I think then the thing is that would you be willing to talk to give an introduction on sacred kingship and sovereignty, which to start us off, because I think we are actually going. I've just talked about what the generic show is going to be about. Let's talk about this specific one.
So talking about sacred kingship, it has a lot to do with how things tie into the land. And there was a strong belief that the ruler of the land was strongly tied to the land, and that his health reflected the health of the land, and they were intricately tied one into the other. And there's a number of stories and ideas that have passed down, especially through mythology, that talk about this connection and this direct tie. And you can look at the Arthurian legends with the concept of the Fisher King, and the Fisher King is obviously the wounded king, and the land is the barren wasteland, because the wound that will not heal does not, get healed over the course of time. So you have that tie, and of course the Fisher King is also the Grail King, and it isn't until they heal the Grail King or the Fisher King that they can move on and find the Grail. So there's a number of different versions of the Fisher King through Arthurian legend. So there's a lot of different ideas about how the land responds to, or how the land handles the ruler of the land. So it used to be considered very much a sacred duty to be the ruler of a area of land.
Yeah, I was immediately thought of the Fisher King. Are there other cultures where we see this?
The Irish definitely have that particular culture. You see it in the Welsh belief structure. So certainly in the British Isles, you see that a lot. And the concept, I'm sure you could look at the Chinese emperor being, considered to be sacred. Most rulers in some fashion were considered to be were considered to be sacred because of their position.
Well, that kind of makes sense to me, but then again, I see the land as sacred.
Right.
I think much of the modern neo-pagan community does.
Oh, I definitely would agree. You know, I think it's hard to look at it in modern times because we don't have kings, especially in this country. But you know, we do see, and yes, thank you. We had Red Knife chiming in. The more promiscuous the president, the better the economy does, I guess. And I know we were talking at one point. We were talking at one point about Clinton and you know, how, you know, well the country did under Clinton, even with all of the scandal. And it's kind of interesting too. You look at that, how well it did, how fertile, you know, the fertile king has the fertile country, and the infertile king has the kind of the dearth of that. So, and even though we don't have kings per se, it's still the ruler of the land.
Yeah, well, it is. I know they did in some African countries as well. So.
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept about how that all ties in, and you know, the better the ruler, the better the land responds to that, I guess is a good way to say. You know, and it's a symbolic thing. It really is the symbolic ownership of the land. So even though we don't have kings here, we do still have that tie. So there's a couple of different books that go very deeply into those ideas. I think you and I had talked about the book Lamass Night, that talks about the idea of the king and the land, and it's sometimes, you know, the sacral king, the idea that the king has to be sacrificed for the land. Not that I'm espousing that at all, but the idea that, you know, that tie is so directly there. Or you can go to the Wicker Man, where, you know, they're like, oh, we have a you know, a substitute king, the fool, the king for a day. And then, you know, at the end of the movies, you know, Sergeant Howie is like, oh, well, you know, if it fails and your cops fail again, it's going to be you, the Lord of the Land, being sacrificed for the land. You know, and even though, you know, Lord Summerisle's like, it will not fail, you still have that kind of feeling that, oh, but if it does, your people are going to rise against you and they're going to put you in this place next year.
Well, so, the right answer would have been yes, in which case I will go in.
Well,
I'm sure, but
yeah, well, you're just seeing at it from that perspective, where he's like, no, of course it won't. This will absolutely work. Because I think, you know, if we want to take a moment to just kind of look at the Wicker Man in a little more detail, I think that for the most part, Lord Summerisle has a pretty good grip on things, but I think there's a part of the people who are there that are still a little bit questioning whether or not this is the correct way to move forward. And he's like, oh no, absolutely, this will work. The crops won't fail. And it's kind of a desperation plea, I think, on his part.
Yeah, what politician doesn't put on a good face to, yes, the pandemic is gone now.
Well, we know it's not. Even though things are open and restaurants are open and things are back to normal, sort of, kind of, it's not gone, you know, and they're having the upsurge of cases. So I think we have a long way to go.
We are working on it.
Yes, but it's in progress.
But we are. Okay, we're talking about another book that, of course, leaps to mind is The Golden Bough, and Fraser's description of the Rex Nemesis, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, having little Latin and no Greek. But the king who lived in the sacred grove and And you can be king, but anybody who kills you gets to be the next king.
Right, right.
Which is a really narrowed down version of the story.
Well, yeah, it has to do with the strongest one taking the lead, obviously, the stronger king taking the lead. Because, you know, you look at it that way, the land wants somebody who is strong, who is powerful, who is a good representation in order to keep it going strongly. So if you had somebody like in Fraser's Golden Bough, if you have somebody coming in and killing the king that's there in the grove, well, obviously that person's stronger, so that would be better for the land.
Yeah. But, you know, Fraser's, I remember one of my earliest encounters with it was in Mary Renault's King Must Die, where the high priestess was the representation of the goddess, and the king was the representation of the god, and every year they get a new one. Hence the name of the book, The King Must Die.
Right. You know, and you see that in some of the other cultures too. I remember reading something, I think it was Mayan or Aztec, and you had somebody who would take the role of, you know, the king, and would be basically have, you know, the women's for the year and the lavish lifestyle and have all sorts of good things, and then at the end of the year would be sacrificed for the good of the land. So that's that again is the same sort of thing. It's like you're feasting this particular person for a length of time, and you know, and then after that length of time is over, then you know, they're given up for the land as a sacrifice. You know, John Barleycorn could be viewed as another one, because again, that's that kind of sacred king where you had somebody who's, you know, standing in for a grain god or a grain king, and is killed and resurrected.
That's more symbolic.
It's much more symbolic, yeah, than an actual sacrifice.
And therefore acceptable to the Christian leadership of the European Middle Ages.
Oh yeah, well, that again, you've got that whole concept of sacrifice, where for the Christian, symbolically, it's, you know, you go to mass and you get the host, and you have that symbolic sacrifice right there.
Yeah, and that is very clearly the sacred king.
Mm-hmm.
Was sacrificing himself for the people.
Right.
I'm not entirely certain that the rest of it doesn't come from that myth. Although, I suppose a lot of what Fraser's referring to is pre-Christ, so probably not. I'm trying to think of other examples. Well, there's always, again, in the modern world, in the late 20th century, the part that I have lived through, any type of human sacrifice is clearly pagan, evil, and therefore in the horror film genre. That's why The Wicker Man was.
Right.
Thomas Tryon, and which was his, where there was a harvest king.
Well, I mean, you could kind of jump over a little bit here to fiction, and you can look at Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You can look at Aslan's sacrifice, because that whole concept of a willing sacrifice would be considered to be a stronger magical force than an unwilling sacrifice. And obviously, you know, the willing victim, the willing sacrifice, time would start to work itself backwards. The stone table would break, and all of the enchantments would be undone. So that concept of willing sacrifice is not something that is addressed all that much, and, you know, because it's not good horror movie fodder, I'm sure. Not that we're, again, espousing anybody sacrifice themselves or anybody else, but if you look at the history and you look at the mythology and you look at that kind of concept, you know, it's kind of an interesting blend of it.
Yeah. Oh, I remembered it was Harvest Home, but yeah, it is what in the modern world, and this goes kind of back to what Changing Times, Changing Worlds is about. Anything that is otherworldly becomes automatically horror.
Right.
If it's got witches, it's horror. If it's got ghosts, it's horror. If it's got pagans, it's horror.
Well, I could go into a long rant about Sabrina the Teenage Witch and how I feel about how that's brought back the whole situation once again of, oh, look, witches equals bad and even pagans equals bad. But you know, that sort of thing is just, it's fiction and has to stay in the realm of fiction.
But in us outside, so are you suggesting, are you talking from a folklore tradition when you're talking about sacred kingship, or do you think there is in your kitchen table talks with Red Knife about our presidents and how well things do with different presidents? Are you suggesting that there may be something to the sacred king?
I think there is. We've had this discussion, you know, barring our current president, we're not going to get into him, but barring that, you know, you look at George W. Bush, and he wasn't exactly what you'd call, I mean, he was married, he had children, but he wasn't exactly virile. He wasn't somebody who had that aura of masculinity, you know, overtly. And I think you see that at that period of time, that the country didn't do as well under him as it could have. But, you know, you step back, you go to Clinton, and all of a sudden, oh, look, it did do as well. It did do very well. You go backwards, you know, to George Bush, the first one, and not exactly the most virile. I mean, again, he had kids and everything, but not the most successful. You know, and you go backwards, and I'm not just going to pick on Republicans. You know, Jimmy Carter wasn't exactly the most successful either, and he didn't come across as a particularly virile king. You go back to the Kennedy, and you get a very concept of a very virile king. You know, it kind of
was powerful. He exuded good old boy power.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the way that is, and you look at the presidents, and you look at the way they are. And you look at Obama, I feel like Obama was kind of middle of the road. You know, he had kids, he obviously was a good man, good husband, he tried really hard, but he struggled a lot. And I mean, for various reasons, but he didn't have that overt virility that some of the others have, and it has nothing to do with race whatsoever. It just has to do with where he was. I think he also had a lot of things up against him. So, you know, you look at how well they do, it depends on where their strengths lie. It doesn't just have to do with sex, obviously.
May I suggest, look at FDR, Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah.
My grandfather my mother was not allowed to say his name. He was always that man in the White House. Because my grandfather was he was a millionaire during the Depression when it actually counted for something.
Right.
But he is sort of like the Fisher King.
He is.
He was the wounded, but he did not present that way.
No.
He presented as a healthy, he did whatever he needed to present as a healthy man to provide. So did Kennedy. Kennedy, right. Who had the back injury and was very, very careful not to look weak in front of a camera.
Right. And I think Roosevelt very much was, you know, a fertile king, and the country did well at that time. So, I mean, certainly, you know, he was in office for an incredible long time, you know, brought everything back from the Depression, brought things, you know, kept serving, and, you know, obviously.
Through the war.
Yeah. And, you know, there was a great deal of success.
The peasants. He was the king of the farmers. He was the king of the workers. He was not the king of the nobles.
Right. And he was the king of the land.
Popular was King John and the barons.
Right. But I mean, he was the king of the land. Obviously, he was the king of the farmers. That would put him very much as the king of the land. Mm-hmm. You know, and again, like I said, we don't have kings, but in perspective, we can put this in finger, you know, quotation marks, king. You know,
yeah, but we're talking leaders.
Yes, we're talking leaders. Just, you know, want to be clear.
Okay, just to extend this metaphor a little bit more, if modern leaders are the equivalent of the sacred kings, Uh, and you look on the internet, you see a lot of people pointing at the various countries who are dealing with the pandemic well, and a lot of them have female leaders. Would that make them sacred queens?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we probably have to skip over gender here, but you know, it's usually referred to as the sacred king, and again in air quotes. But they could be sacred queens or sacred, you know, sovereignty. If you want to just put a title on it that does not have a gender, you could go with sovereignty, and that which, you know, is the head of the land.
Yeah, because I was looking, you know, I saw Merkel addressing her country, and I wanted her to be my leader so much. She was strong and
Yeah,
warm.
she knows what she's doing. She knows what she's doing, and she knows what's best for, you know, her land. So that.
But I'm not sure you can take it away from gender. I think that in the ancient days, some lands were matriarchies. They had a high priestess queen, or they had a king, priest king, and they had a different relationship. The priestess was a embodiment of the land, and the priest, the king, many coronation ceremonies had the king marrying the queen as a way, as she was in the embodiment of the land and he married the land by marrying the queen. The queen embodied the land, and I think that I don't think you can really escape that gendering. You may argue that.
I think it depends on the culture. I really think it depends on the culture. You know, females tend to be receptive, and that's why we tend to be more connected to the earth, or, you know, tied to the earth in that way symbolically. I think it really would depend on the culture that you're looking at, you know, and depend on how it's viewed. But yeah, definitely the king marrying somebody who is from that land would give them that tie to the land through the bloodline, for sure.
I tripped over that with my SCA background,
Mm-hmm.
Society of Creative Anachronism, which is a historical reenacting group, because somebody had developed a coronation ceremony once where they were echoing that aspect of the pagan coronation, and we said, no, you can't do that, because in the SCA there's a very strict game religion break. You may not make anybody participate in any ceremony that without their awareness and permission. So
Right.
that was a big deal in its day, about 35 years ago. But that was when I first tripped over that particular aspect of sacred kingship.
Right. Well, and I think I've run across smaller things. Like there's a series by Tom Dietz, and it's the first book is Soulsmith, and the second one is Dream Builder, and the third one is Wordwrite. And it really ties in very closely with the Mabinogion, and one of the main characters is tied to an area of land in which he can't leave it because he is the ruler, so to speak, of that area. He's kind of like the baron, if you will, or the lord of that section of the land. And he literally is physically tied to the land. He can't leave the land without being ill after a period of time. And in order to break that, he has to go through a complex ritual, and somebody else has to take up the mantle of watching over the land. And when somebody doesn't, at one point in the series, the land begins to sicken. So it has to have someone tied into the land to guard over it in some of these concepts. And where the Mabinogion, you know, is tied in with the, you know, obviously it's Welsh. You know, that obviously comes from the myth directly and has been adapted. So we talked about Lamas Night a little bit ago, and it kind of looks at the idea of this sacred king cycle. It proposes that every 7 years or so, there's some sort of cycling of that, you know, in that particular, and it says either the king or the king's surrogate will end up being, you know, sacrificed in some way for the land if it's called for, and it may or may not be called for. If there's a need, then it is. So, you know, you see this in the literature, and it's definitely something that's been drawn down from other places and other times and how it's been adapted.
Yeah, since I've just had to jot that down. Okay, I gotta go read that one. Yeah. You want to talk for a minute? I was thinking of another version of that we see in the Tiffany Aching subset of the Terry Pratchett Discworld books about the land affecting the type of magic that's used on it. Does that
I'm not actually familiar with that one. I think you might have to address that.
Oh, you didn't? You haven't read the Discworld books?
I've read them a long time ago.
Well, the Tiffany Aching ones were done fairly recently. It was a young girl who lived out on the chalk-based downs, and when she bumped into Granny Weatherwax, who lived up in the mountains, her relationship with the earth was with rock, and her magic didn't work as well down on the chalk, but the way that Tiffany Aching and her grandmother had done magic was based on the chalk. And you should go and start with the first Tiffany Aching book. There's a lot of very interesting views of magic on that. But yeah, the land, there's a rock formation on the mountain. As we in New England laughingly refer to the hills we live on as mountains, because they're old and they have been much eroded, but they are still mountains at their core. And there's a rock formation that I see a face in, and that is the Grandfather Mountain. And I talk to the mountain that I live on, and it's real to me. And I
think that the land, the features of the land, the part of the land we live on are very, very real to us. I know that we have a land spirit that lives out in our acreage out behind our house, and he's very concerned. He really liked the people who lived here before. And it's taken a while for this land spirit to adapt to the new owners, us, and to understand we're not going to do stupid things. And we've shooed off the kids next door on their ATVs, and, you know, trying to keep the land as pure as we possibly can and keep it sacred. You know, and it is interesting to look at that. And I love your concept of the mountains. When we talk about mountains, the thing that a lot of people forget, and this is a statistic that I heard a few years ago, and it stuck with me. We live on small mountains. They're smaller mountains, certainly, and they're eroded and everything, but there are still people who die every year in the White Mountains, especially in the Presidential Range, trying to hike through them. So if you look at the statistics, there's usually one or two, you know, every few years we lose a couple of people up there. Even with GPS trackers and everything, we do lose a few. So looking at them not as mountains is kind of disrespectful, I think, because they definitely are. And they have as much power to disrupt people's lives, I think, as any other mountain. And they have the same sacredness. Maybe we don't view them quite the same as we do Mount Everest, because that's just, you know, amazingly awesome. Everest has a special place in my heart after reading so much about it, and just the amazing prowess of the people who climb it and struggle to get up it. And I know I could never do it with my asthma. It just wouldn't work. But you know, we live on mountains here too. And, you know, the mountains that we live on have personality. As you said, you have the grandfather face on the mountain, and that you talk to that, and that's admirable and that's respectable.
And necessary, I think.
Well, yeah,
I tell people they need to. You have to relate. you can't be generic when you're a nature religionist. It's the land that you're relating to. I look at the people who is all right, let's just take a silly image. The people who celebrate, if they're in New England, mid spring at Ostara, which usually has a blizzard, by putting flowers from a hothouse on their altar and dancing around in flowery clothes. And I was like, guys, it's this is we are this is New England. Maybe
Right.
England, the crocus and the daffodils are blooming, but in England we're shoveling a lot of white stuff. And so celebrate spring when spring comes, celebrate winter when winter is here, celebrate the fall when harvest is here, but whatever is local for you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember we went over to Ireland in February a few years ago, and there were flowers blooming, and it was, in the 40s, and that was February, and back here it was snowing like crazy. A friend of mine and I went to Rome a few years before that in February, and it was 60 degrees, and the orange trees had oranges growing on them in the middle of Rome. It really, you have to look at it as you're there. I mean, you can't say, oh, it's this for everybody, because it's not. You're right.
Yeah, or as I've told people that it's what happens at the equinoxes is the Lord and the Lady pass each other on the equator and wave as they go by, and we should be welcoming as the Lady is heading down to Australia and Tierra del Fuego and wherever, and the Lord is coming up for his half of the year up in the northern hemisphere. I think that we should be happy to celebrate whoever's here, and not say, oh, the Lady's going away, this is so sad. And when you could be saying, oh, the Lord's here, yay. Because everybody gets all excited about spring and starting in February. It's that spring's here. No, it's not. Spring's here in March. Spring's here. Oh, anyway, but yeah,
Well, going back kind of,
I'm sorry, let's get back to sovereignty.
Oh, yeah. But going back to that, I mean, one of the things that we talked about a lot recently in my group is the concept of the land and the king, and they have to be tied together, but they have to serve each other. The land and the king have to serve each other. And, no matter how fertile a king may be, and again, fertile in air quotes here, because they may not be, out there, making lots of babies, but they might be somebody who's good at erecting change or good at making things happen. You can look at Kennedy like that. You can look at FDR like that. But
yeah.
if you are serving the land and the land is serving you and you have a balance, that's great. When it falls out of balance and you're no longer serving the land, then the land will no longer serve you. And I think that's something that's an interesting concept. And you see that in failed kingships. I think you can look at England with some of the kings that faltered and failed. You can look at that with pretty much any place where something has gone horribly wrong and corruption has taken over or whatever. And you can say, okay, well, now the king is no longer serving the needs of the land and the people, and it fails. And you can see that, if you look back through the line of British kings, when you had one that did well for a while and everything was great, and then all of a sudden something changed, then things went badly. And I think that's something to bear in mind too. The land will only support a king who is serving the people, in some faction. And eventually, if you have somebody, I can't help but think of Kim Jong-un, and I've done extensive reading through various novels and such on the way that the world is over in North Korea. And it's not a fertile place. They have a lot of trouble getting their crops to grow. They have a lot of trouble feeding their people. They have a lot of trouble getting enough coal, and they have to get coal from China. it's not a good relationship with the land. It's good for the government. It's not good for the land. And that's why I think North Korea has so many problems, is they're not serving the people, they're not serving the land. And it's not a healthy relationship between the people and their ruler, their quote unquote king. So I mean, you have to kind of look at some of these countries around the world where things might be great for the ruling country, but or for the ruling family, but they're not really great for the people, and the land is responding to that. So, dictatorships tend to things don't go so well for the land. So something to kind of bear in mind. You can kind of see that, and I like I said, I've heard some horror stories about North Korea and the stuff that goes on there, and it's not a good place, and it's not good for the people. So the land doesn't respond well.
Deep sigh.
Yeah, huge sigh.
It's do you think that it translates? Again, we're looking at this symbolically, but would it translate to governors? Or are they not around?
Yeah, I think you can say that. And like I said, you can have areas that are watched over. And if they're, certainly with governors, if the governor has the best intentions for the people he's governing, then I would say that yes, that's the sort of thing that also has that kind of relationship. You can have people that watch over the land and are kind of taking that role, if there's not a magical perspective from one of the leaders. And I think most leaders don't look at it as a magical thing, but it falls into that.
Yeah, it does. But you can look at it symbolically.
Yes. They may never understand it, but if they're doing what's right for the people, the land will respond.
Kind of like what we're trying to teach with Changing Times, Changing Worlds. If you get the energy right, then the physical follows the energy.
Right, exactly.
So,
or, form follows function, that sort of thing, and it just moves where it should.
So, did you have any notes? Do you have anything else that you wanted? I was going to ask the people who are listening, there's a little button at the bottom that says reactions, and if you click that, and you can make a hand that if you have a question, I'll unmute you if you have a question. Any questions from the audience? And if not, then we shall continue to speak until we've used up our hour. Nope, I'm not seeing any. Oh. And no hands raised. Okay. So
I see a hand waving. Is that a question?
Is that a question or no? No, it's just that was just a hello.
So
we're gradually getting used to the
fun that is Zoom,
which we will be using at the conference in November.
Yeah.
So we'd better get used to it. But we have 5 months.
So another story came to mind about this kind of concept, and it's not about people, but it is kind of an interesting allegory. It's the Book of the Dun Cow by Walter Wangerin Jr. I don't know if you've read that one. And it talks about the rooster Chanticleer and how he is the lord of the coop, and he is watching over his land, and his land is good, and he's a good king, even though he's grumpy. And to the west of him, I believe it's to the west of him, there's an old rooster who basically is kind of falling apart, and he isn't treated well, and he ends up falling prey to the evil that's trying to encroach on the land. And when he becomes, and he really is kind of the Fisher King, he's broken, and when he succumbs to that evil, the land falls into chaos and rebellion. And then, you know, the evil power that's trying to take over that area finds a crack and is able to start leaking out his poison. And he tries to poison, you know, Chanticleer, because that's the next kingdom over. And it's, you know, Chanticleer being the ruler of the land, and the land itself is helping to rebel against this to some extent. You know, and he has to keep his land together in order to keep his country together. So there are other examples of leaders of areas, not just, you know, countries, where they're representing that connection to the land.
And I'm actually thinking, as you come up with these references to many, many books, teach, perhaps later on in the summer, if you have a hole in your schedule on a Wednesday, one of the panels we often have at Changing Times, Changing Worlds is book recommendations panels. And you've done that before. Do it really, really well. And so I was thinking maybe we could get you to come back.
Oh yeah, that'd be one I'd be happy to do again, certainly.
And maybe we can do it with this platform as a panel and have a few other people who have books to recommend. So, so I guess I see that we're down to our last 5 minutes or so. Do you have anything that you would want to say about Changing Times, Changing Worlds, having been there since I think the beginning?
I think I missed the first year, but I've been there every year since. You know, Red Knife has definitely been there every single year. So, I mean, I love it. It's a place that we go to get away. I'm going to miss not being able to see people this year because some people I only see once a year. So it's kind of a bummer that I'm going to have to wait an extra year to see people.
We are going to have 2 tracks, so that there's going to be one full-time programming track and one full-time socializing track.
Which will be nice.
So you'll be able to chat with people.
Hopefully everybody will be there. You know, we're trying to see like when people can make it. I work full-time, so, and then some. So it may or may not be able to be there some of the day. I'll probably be able to be there in the evenings most of the time.
Well, maybe in the evenings during the Monday through Friday.
Possibly. I have a Wednesday night class. I think it's Wednesday night in the fall. So we'll see how that goes.
But I'm also hoping that we can get some people from the West Coast if we can have later classes.
That would be nice.
Because I just don't think that if we're having a class at 7, I think for them, they're still at work. So
we're on their way home or enjoying dinner or something.
But if we have what's a 10 o'clock class for us, then they should have time to get home from work.
I may be heading for Pumpkin Land at that point. I don't know, but we'll see.
Jane does. Jane becomes a pumpkin fairly early. But, well, do you have any final thoughts on sacred, the connection between the land leader and the spirit, I guess? The spirit connection between the land and the leader.
I mean, I think it's something that has to be respected. And I mean, you know, all presidents take a vow to, you know, uphold the Constitution, and you know, the Constitution is for protection of the land and the people. So, I mean, that is kind of vowing to protect the land and be, you know, the protectorate of the people. So that's something that should be respected at all times. And, you know, that should be the foremost thing that any leader of the land is upholding, is the law of the land and the rule of the land. You know, and if they're doing their job, then obviously that will be a better situation for everyone. If they're not upholding that and they're not upholding their vows, then that, you know, puts them at odds with the land itself and the people of the land.
And then each of us in our home area are the leader. As it breaks down, you get your king, your house, your country leader, then you get your governors, and you get down lower. So each of us is the leader, the sacred interface with our personal bit of land.
Right. And I think, you know, even where I was talking earlier about chasing the kids off that were driving around and making trails in my backyard, their response is, well, you're not using it for anything. And I said, well, you know, the reality is I'm using it for the animals that live here and you're not allowed on it. So get off, you know, and we have no trespassing signs. So they blatantly, obviously ignored them. So fortunately, I know some of the police in town and they're like, oh, just let us know if they do that again. So that was, you know, a good thing.
Yeah, that's good. So
We have good police in our town, so I have to stand up for them on that. They're good people.
it's all really individual.
Yeah, we're a small town, so everybody knows everybody.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess I'm going to thank you. I'm going to end the show, but I'm going to invite the people who are on to stay and give us a little bit of feedback, because I think right now we need a little bit more feedback, and we don't need to necessarily put that up on YouTube. So thank you, and I'm going to sign off now. This is Chipicon, and temporarily at least, this is the Wednesday show for Changing Times, Changing Worlds. Thank you, Coyote Skywoman, for coming and talking about Sacred Queen and Kingship. And
You're welcome.
yeah.